Good morning. Welcome to South by Southwest EDU. Thank you so much for kicking off your festival with us. We really appreciate it. A little housekeeping to start. If you do have questions, please use the South by Southwest EDU Go app, and we're going to try to reserve a few minutes at the end of the panel for the questions. So you heard the titles of our wonderful panel, but sometimes titles don't give us all the info we need. So I'm going to ask each of them to quickly tell us how they get to spend their day. Celina, let's start with you.
Can you hear? Okay, good. I would say if my calendar could talk, that I spend part of my day as an educator, part of my day as a referee, and third part as a hype girl. So in the morning, I may be talking with teachers and students about how to vote or how to run a voter registration drive. At the end of the day, I may be yelling at lawmakers saying, do your job, stand up, we need you, that type of thing. So I would say that that is how I spend most of my days.
Julia?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks, Erin. So at our Children's Trust, we represent youth to protect their right to a livable climate. And so I spend my days helping our team decide which cases we're going to bring across the United States and globally. And I also have the privilege of working with young people, helping them prepare to go to court, to do their media work. And I'm a co-executive director, so I also help raise money for the organization.
The most fun part, always.
Right.
Harper?
So I'm a senior staff attorney at the National ACLU in our LGBTQ and HIV project, and so our goal is to litigate across the country to protect the rights of LGBTQ people. And so recently that's mostly meant going around the country to different communities and helping transgender people vindicate their rights under federal and increasingly state constitutions.
All right. To sort of table set this conversation, we have a short video. So cue the video, please.
State courts are the people's courts. They hear 95% of all cases, and state judges have the final say in the vast majority of these decisions. Get to know your rights. Get to know your state constitution and courts.
See, I told you it was short. I'm in it. To expand on that just a little bit, we all know that the U.S. Supreme Court and the U.S. Constitution really get the most attention when it comes to rights and the law in this country. But that shifted a little bit in 2022 when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, and it put reproductive rights cases, the primary venue for those became state courts. And that helped show the public a little more the power of state courts and state constitutions and the importance of the impact, really, of state Supreme Court decisions on all sorts of areas, obviously, not just reproductive rights. So the Brennan Center launched this nonpartisan website, State Court Report, to highlight developments in state constitutional law and to also help explain that state constitutions can have more expansive rights than the federal constitution, including in areas like access to public education, voting, and environmental issues. State constitutions are also much easier usually to amend than federal constitutions, including in many states, citizens being able to propose initiatives for the ballot. So it makes state constitutions more reflective often of what the people are concerned about over periods of time. There really are living documents. So we're just kind of hoping to discuss that today, highlight some of those things, and help you understand why state constitutions are worth talking about. So we'll jump in. This question is for both Harper and Julia. Harper, I'll ask you to start. Can you tell us about some of the youth-related or youth-led lawsuits that you guys have worked on and participated in? Harper, you first.
Sure. So one of the things that we've been working on at the ACLU is trying to protect transgender young people's rights in schools, in their homes, in medical offices. And so we've brought a number of cases under state constitutions in state court trying to protect transgender young people's right to seek health care in their own state. And so we've had a case in Texas, and we currently have cases in Kansas, Montana, and Ohio. And what's interesting about those is that, the state constitutions, like Erin said, can have more and different and greater protections. And so in some states, there might be a specific right, like in Montana, to health care or to privacy Or like in Kansas, there's Section 1, which not only protects abortion rights, but also protects personal and bodily autonomy. And so regardless of what the Supreme Court is doing on this issue, we are helping represent young people in front of state courts to say, under my state constitution, I have a right to seek this health care in my state, in my home, where I live with my family.
Thank you. Julia?
Yeah, and if we could put the slides up, please. Awesome. So I'm just going to show you some pictures that really tell the story of what we do. And the reason I'm not advancing. Oh, there we go. Thank you. The reason we do this work on behalf of youth and suing governments to protect young people's climate rights is because it's really the biggest issue driving the health of children for generations to come, and it's an issue they care a lot about. And next slide, please. And when we look to historical cases like Brown versus Board of Education, it's often been young people at the forefront of protecting their rights. Next slide. So what a lot of people don't know is that the vast majority of state constitutions have a right that protects a healthy environment or protects the public's right to their natural resources like air and water. So it's a really good resource for educators to have and to know about. Next slide. And just to give you an example of that, the Texas Constitution, since we're here in Texas, provides public rights to the preservation and conservation of all natural resources of the state. And that's been interpreted to mean that it includes protection of the atmosphere and air in addition to water resources. Next slide. So one of our cases that's perhaps most known is Held versus State of Montana, where we represented youth in suing their government over their fossil fuel extractive processes and fossil fuel dependency and the blind eye they were turning to climate change. And so we litigated the first ever children's constitutional climate trial in the summer of 2023. Next slide. And we can skip forward one more, please. One more. And we won this case after a week-long trial. It was really an incredible first of its kind constitutional win in the United States. And this kind of case has been replicated by youth around the world. There are now upwards of about 90 or 100 youth-led cases against governments, many of which are our children's trusts. And for educators, we have a trial website where you can actually watch the whole trial. You can see young people testify, you can watch the scientists testify, and it's a fabulous resource. And then next slide, I'll just speak to one more case, which is called Navahine versus Hawaii Department of Transportation. This case, we took a different approach, and instead of going after the fossil fuel development, we targeted the transportation sector, which was Hawaii's growing source of greenhouse gas pollution. Next slide. And this case settled because you can see in this photo that the governor and the director of the Department of Transportation came to the table and chose to work with the youth rather than fight them. And it's the first of its kind settlement agreement where the department is required to get to zero emissions in the transportation sector by 2045. Super incredible. Next slide. And we also have a settlement website where you will soon be able to track the progress of this settlement agreement, and there's some really awesome videos. And next slide, and I'll wrap with this. There's a Hawaii Youth Transportation Council that was required in the settlement agreement. So youth actually are stakeholders in this process. They have a voice, and they're required to be consulted on the decisions made by the department going forward. So huge success, and just an example of some of our cases across the country. Thank you.
An excellent example of how dynamic litigation can be and how sometimes it can even end in agreements with the parties both making a lot of progress. You all may have noticed that voting and voting lawsuits are in the news a lot lately, and a lot of those involve the work of the League of Women Voters. By their nature, almost all of these voting cases involve protecting young people's rights, whether directly or indirectly. And I wanted to see if you could highlight for us a case that shows how state courts and constitutions are brought into these cases.
Yeah, so the league is in all 50 states plus DC and the U.S. Virgin Islands. We have about or more than 750 local leagues, so we're literally everywhere.
Everywhere.
We call ourselves like the neighborhood watch of democracy. But one of the cases I think two cases that really show the power of state constitution is both in Pennsylvania. I'm going to highlight Pennsylvania right now. In 2010, we had the redistricting cycle. 2011, Pennsylvania drew a map. And over time, between 2011 and heading into the 2018 election, in 2012, and this is dealing with the Republican delegation because that was the majority in the state at the time. But in 2012, Republicans won 49% of the cases. In 2014, the vote, 49% of the vote. In 2014, 55% of the vote, and then in 2016, 54% of the vote. But the actual delegation, they won 72% of the seats in the state. Okay. And so we filed litigation challenging the map. And because the federal government, the Supreme Court had already been starting to do us dirty, and so we leveraged the state constitution, a clause within it, Article 1, Section 5, that was the free and fair elections clause. And so that clause actually is broader than the federal government. So we know that the U.S. Constitution is like the floor, and then states can create greater rights for its citizens. And so we leveraged the state constitutional provision and challenged the map. Mm-hmm. And so what happened was that the people in Pennsylvania said, let's hold it because the Supreme Court is making these decisions. But ultimately, the case came back to the state, and we did win and had an opportunity to change the map and get better representation for people in Pennsylvania. And then I would just say the Black empowerment case also was a recent case in 2022 where mail-in ballots were being rejected, and ofincimes in places where colleges and universities were. Right. And so 10,000 ballots were rejected because, when you fill out your ballot, you fold it up, especially if you're mailing it in, you put it in an envelope, and you have to sign the envelope and date it. So in some instances, people were not completing the date. And so they threw out 10,000 ballots because the date was wrong, or the date was not completed. It might have said November 4th, and it didn't say 2022. Right. And so those ballots got thrown out. So we challenged the case saying that date is meaningless on the outside of the ballot. What actually matters is what's inside on the ballot. And so we won that, or it was paused, but essentially we got a win because that was not a determining factor for ballots being thrown out and rejected. So I think that because of where those ballots were and the fact that they were in a place in Pennsylvania where there's at least 3 universities, it affected young people in particular.
Yeah. Because the league is all over the country, you have a chance to meet and work with so many young people yourself, and then also throughout all the work that the league does. Can you talk a little bit about how participating in not just voting, but these different cases, how it affects young people and how they think about their participation in the country?
So I can only, because I'm no longer young. I dyed my hair, but I'm not.
You're youthful to me, Celina.
I know, I am to me too. But, when I talk to young people, college-age people, following college, one of the things people talk about is, their pain points. We speak about democracy. I was on a panel in Selma just a couple of days ago, and there was a question by one of the panelists, like, what does church mean? What does democracy mean? We use this lofty term, but what we don't talk about are the values associated with it. And so when talking to young people, I try to center, what is your pain point? And I have an expression, I try to empower the pain points. So what are you pissed off about? Are you pissed off that, you can't learn about your history or the full history of the United States? That's someone in your state who decides that. And the state constitution and people who are appointed in the state make those decisions. If you don't have access to housing or you feel like it's too expensive, you can't afford anything, you have 5 roommates, there's someone who decides that in your state. And it's often within the Constitution. And so thinking about what are the actual pain points, what is actually affecting people's lives right now, and who is the person responsible for making that decision, whether it's easier or harder for you to survive, live, thrive. And so thinking about how that happens and making sure that people know the pain point that you have is actually you have some consequence in the election by voting for the person. And the last thing I'll say is, a lot of state judges are appointed by the governor or whoever in their state, because the rules are changing about who can appoint people, like in North Carolina and other places. But when you think about what state court judges do. They decide things like healthcare, who has access to healthcare, what the school, what books you'll be able to learn, what books are prohibited and accepted in school, what's a livable wage, and what that means. What are the workers' rights? They decide all of those things that affect our day-to-day. And so just drawing the connection point between really the importance of what happens in your state and what happens locally is the things that really affect your day-to-day life.
Right, exactly. I know there really is so much. Harper, to bring it back to the courtroom a little bit, as Celina's just highlighting, state courts are hearing all of the issues every bit as lofty and with weight as the federal courts and U.S. Supreme Court are, but state courts can feel, you've said to me, a little more of the place. Can you talk about that, what it feels like for plaintiffs to be in a state court versus a federal one?
Sure. So I think, state court judges, as you saw in the video, handle the vast majority of cases. So state court judges are hearing things like divorces and custody and neighbor disputes, things that are directly affecting your community, and they're often elected or appointed at the county level. And so they really are from that place. Federal judges, there are fewer courts. They may come from the same state, but from a different part of the state, and it's just a bigger geographic area. And so I think for state court judges, they're in the community that is affected. And so when our young people are in court and testifying, they're testifying in the place where they go to school, where they live with their family. And often that's why, our plaintiffs are anonymous, are does, because they don't want everybody to know that they're transgender. First, it breaks my heart that these young people feel like in this climate that is the safest decision for them and their family, and also at the same time wanting to honor their, wanting to be private in their community and sort of who they want to tell about being trans. But I think then with state court judges, because of that community feeling, I think that they are open to hearing more of the complexity of human life. I mean, I think federal judges can too, but the federal docket is a little more economic, right? It's big companies suing other big companies just because those courts are of limited jurisdiction. But state courts hear everything. And so I think that sense of place is really important, especially since in our cases, what we're arguing for is that these young people have a right to see doctors in their community. These young people have a right to attend their local schools and use restrooms without being harassed. These young people have a right to play on sports teams with their friends and not have parents screaming at them on the sideline that they're in the wrong place. And I think state court judges get that, right? Because they are sending their kids to those same schools. They are in those communities.
Right, yeah, the community, it really matters and is an important feeling for the plaintiffs to have, if also a scary feeling, I imagine. For your clients who are participating in something that's so personal to them and so high stakes, do they appreciate that they are also having such an impact on the law, or does it feel more personal to them? I imagine it might depend on the age as well, but since we don't get to hear from your plaintiffs because they are does, I'm curious if you could talk a little about that.
I should know better now. I am consistently surprised and impressed by how even our young sort of teen clients really understand their place in history and the place in this moment. When we talk to them, they understand, they know, my state has an attorney general and my attorney general doesn't want me to feel safe here. They are really able to articulate in a specific way, I am being targeted and my family is being targeted by elected officials at all levels. So I think their sense of what is the state government apparatus and what is it doing to my family to make our life better or worse, they actually have a really nuanced understanding. Okay. And I think that's because it's in the air, right? They know that because they're trans, are a political target. And I think they have a sense of their place in history too, because when we talk to them about these cases, we say, look, the goal is to win, right? And we think that we can win. And also, even if we don't, this is a moment of public education, right? This is an opportunity to educate the courts and educate people who follow our case about who are trans kids, what is it that they want? They want the same thing as everybody else. And part of legal cases is, marking a moment in history of injustice, right? I think you think about cases that make change, a lot of them are cases where plaintiffs lose, but that's also a moment where we as a country can say, my God, do we want to live in a place where this is the law? And so I think young people do have that sense of it is important for them to tell their stories, even if they are anonymous, even if ultimately we don't prevail, although, in places like Montana and Ohio, we have, and I think we can continue. So I really think that they have a remarkable presence about them, even if they're anonymous.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, the educational opportunity is something that we don't think of as much as those who participate in organizations do much litigation. It's always important to remember who the faces are. Julia, your clients, sometimes it's a little different. They're excited and able to be a little more public facing. You have all different kinds of young people as clients. I'm wondering, are there any commonalities between them? Do they get into the intricacies of the law? Tell us a little bit about it. It's so exciting and interesting seeing these pictures and results, but tell us about these kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can show you some more of them if we go to the next slide. These are 4 of my clients who are part of the Lighthizer versus Trump case, suing over the president's executive orders on fossil fuel energy and requiring our government to unleash fossil fuel energy and block wind and solar. And they're just, 4 of these youth we represent, but we represent a real diversity of youth. And the thing they share in common is their passion to protect the planet and their climate for their generation and generations of young people to come. But they all have very different and uniquely personal stories because they come from different parts of the country, they come from different religious and cultural backgrounds, and so they are affected in different ways. Some have asthma, some have lost homes from wildfire, some have been flooded out of their communities. So it really varies depending upon their personal, unique story. Next slide. But this just shows, this is an image of the Lighthizer plaintiffs outside of the court. Some of them had testified in court that day, and the thing they're able to do is come together and really celebrate the work they're doing. And that said, this took place in Montana, and many of the youth come from communities that really want to keep fossil fuels as our predominant energy source. So they do deal with the kind of hardship of having people who are angry in their communities that they're trying to protect their rights to life and liberties and climate. Next slide. It is amazing. It's a deep privilege to watch young people testify and have a platform to really tell their story. So unlike the does who may not have that opportunity to really say, hey, this is how I'm affected by what my government is doing to me and the choices they're making when I have no vote and no say in the matter. Next slide. Oh, I'll stop there.
Oh, great. What was the age range in that photo? It looked like a 10-year-old there in the front.
Yeah, some of our youngest plaintiffs are about 8, and I'd say the bulk of our plaintiffs are teenagers, and then all the way up into kind of college age. And youth can reach out and get in touch with us. We're working in a lot of different states.
Yeah, wonderful. I know those kids seem so young, but I have a 12-year-old who would like to freely give his opinion on just about everything all the time. So I can see how an 8-year-old could do the same. So it is a midterm election year. You may have heard there were just primaries here in the state of Texas that are lots of runoffs happening as well. So I couldn't not take the opportunity, Celina, to ask you, what would you like educators and people who have the opportunity to work with educators and youth, how can they help raise the voter turnout rate for young voters? Because there has been uptick, but as you know, it's still way lower than we would like it to be, especially in the midterms.
Yeah, but we saw some positive increased trends in
Right.
November 2025,
Yep.
which I'm excited about. And I think that, sometimes people may associate non-participation with disinterest, and I don't think that that is true at all. I think that people want to feel connected to an outcome. And if they feel like they're voting and that it's not going to have an outcome, then it makes you feel like you shouldn't vote. But I think, in having conversations, we have partnerships all over the country when it comes to like voting. Like the league recruited 30,000 poll workers last November for the election. And we did the same thing for 2024, where we are encouraging people to become poll workers, educating, training people. But why is that important? Who is that poll worker, and the person who is also the election observer is really important. We think about teachers. So we have we're building a partnership with a few education organizations, NEA, AFT, and others, because we think that we know that teachers are trusted people in their community. So when they are at the polls, providing information, observing the election, and also poll workers themselves, people tend to trust that more. And I think, there's a lot of villainizing of poll workers on the federal level. Like, these people are stealing votes, they're cheating, they're counting things, all things. But when you really think about voting, it happens by people in our community. These people work 15 to 17 hours to administer an election. Is there anyone who's worked as a poll worker? Or, yes. Okay,
Yay, we have a few. Wonderful.
Yeah. And we also work with young people in high schools and colleges to run voter registration drives. But what we saw in 2024 is that 90 million people who were registered to vote did not turn out. So it may not be completely a registration issue. It's really about get out to vote and making sure that people can actually turn out to vote and vote for pro-democracy reforms, things that actually affect your life in a positive way. And so one of the things that the League does is we have vote411.org, which is your one-stop shop for all voting information. So you put in your address, and it shows you your ballot, exactly what races are on your ballot, who's on there, and then we, kind of harass people, the candidates, to fill out the information, because we want the public to know, how does this person feel about education? How does this person feel about healthcare? How does this person feel about, like, the neighboring issues that you're talking about? And so arming people with information and education about what the people who want to represent them, what they actually believe, is really, really important. And so I would just say that whenever we're talking to anyone, young people especially, but anyone, we have to be able to connect how showing up to vote will actually improve your day-to-day life. It cannot be something way in the clouds. And the election is just one inflection point. Civic engagement for the League happens every single day. We are talking with Board of Election officials. We are in communities educating people around civics. And I would just give this stat. I give this stat all the time, and I think I'm going to say it until I die. Well, hopefully I won't have to say it until I die. But in 2024, just 3 days after the election, more than 2 million people searched on Google, how do I change my vote for president? And I was like, holy shit. That is bad. It means people don't know. They think it's like a layaway plan. It's not. Like, when we vote for president, we are with that person for 4 years, and they get to make sweeping policies that affect all of our lives. And so when I think about voting and really drilling it home, connecting it to our everyday, but also the long-term effects, whether you vote or not, we all have to live with the outcome. And so just connecting those dots, I think, is really important. And the educators are a huge part of that, because they are trusted messengers and can deliver that message effectively.
Right. Yeah, I think it's highlighting even what all is on the ballot, how many races. On this topic, many states elect their state Supreme Court justices, and that's something that a lot of people don't know, and then they go in and look at their ballot and they feel underprepared. So looking at what's on your ballot ahead of time, especially in the cases of judges, can be really helpful, and something people just don't know about. So the more we can talk about it throughout the years of education is really important. I'm gonna
say one more thing.
Oh yeah, go for it.
At the League, we have these things called ballot parties. And so if you plug into your local league, we bring your ballot, we will pull out the voter guide. You can see if these people have answered the questions, and you basically fill out your ballot together. It's not choosing who you vote, but it's a collective community activity where we all do our ballot, and then we turn it in, based on whenever the deadline is. But we try to make it fun to do this, because voting takes effort.
Right,
to do.
of course, yeah. I'm going to give you guys a little of a multiple choice on this one, so you can answer whichever part of the question you want. As I mentioned at the top, state constitutions are easier to amend than the federal constitution is. So often on the ballot, there will be proposed constitutional amendments that people can vote for. Already for 2026, there's more than 70 that are already scheduled to be on the ballot, with possible more to come. So I'm curious if I would like to hear from you either a ballot initiative that's coming up that you're watching, a ballot initiative that has impacted your work in the past, or as a bonus, if you don't like, so it's a really three-part. State constitutions have extremely unique clauses on all of the things you can think about. We have an essay series of a state constitution essay for every state and finding out how people handle requirements to amend the Constitution, environmental clauses, some have truly historically involved parking in small towns, if that has to be in the Constitution for whatever reason. So interested if there are any unique constitutional clauses as well that you might want to share. So ballot initiative you're watching, one that's impacted your work, or a state constitutional clause that just surprised you or amused you or appalled you even. Any of those options? Celina, do you want to start, or either of you guys want to jump in?
No,
Harper, hit us.
I want Harper to start.
All right. So a number of state constitutions, more than you would think, have what's called a single subject clause. So Ohio has one, Kansas has one, a couple other states do. And so in the state constitution, it will say, hey, state legislature, all your bills have to be about one thing. And which is interesting, because when we think about like federal legislation and how the sausage is made, right? These bills can have all sorts of things tacked on, but some state constitutions recognized early on, maybe we don't want to do that, right? It shouldn't be that if you can get a little less than half the people to vote on one thing and a little less than half of the state legislature to vote on another, you shouldn't be able to put them together and get something passed through. And so I think that's interesting, because a lot of bills that target trans people will often be log rolled in that way. You'll have some people who want to talk about, who should be able to play in youth sports, and some people who want to legislate who can use which restrooms, and you cobble them together and suddenly you have a bill that people can vote on. And so I think that's really interesting, because we've used that to challenge anti-trans laws in many states, and I think it also helps draw attention in the public to, this is what your state legislators are doing, right? They're making these back alley deals that are hurting people. And your state constitution specifically says you shouldn't be able to do that. So I love that clause, because it's also a neutral way to say, hey, if you're going to do this thing that's going to hurt people, you have to do it one at a time. You can't do it all together.
Okay. Great. Julia, do you have one?
Yeah, so back in the early 70s when Earth Day was founded, that's when we saw a lot of these environmental rights amendments get into state constitutions. And I would say we're in the second revolution, where a lot of people around the country are trying to bring amendments into their state constitutions, which we call sort of green amendments, to protect environmental rights. And we are having one of those on our ballot, hopefully this year, in the state of Oregon, where I come from. So I'm excited about that.
Oh, interesting. Okay, Celina, do you want to jump in, or do you want us to go to questions? Another multiple choice for you.
I know. I would just say very quickly, in 2024 and following in 2022, when the court decided that Roe v. Wade was no longer the law of the land, we saw so many ballot initiatives around the country around women's autonomy, because after that decision, so many states tried to put on the ballot restrictions to women's right to choose, right? And so I was really hopeful and inspired that every single one, I think it was like 12 states, every single one of them failed, and women were able to protect their autonomy, and not just women, but male allies who supported. And so to me, that was like a sweeping ballot initiative effort across the country, where I think people won. And so I always like to remember that, because we still have the power and we can win.
Yeah. And those types of amendments, like I said at the top, really show how state constitutions are often responsive to how people feel. Conversely, there were a lot of legislative amendments passed that have banned abortion in those states. So it's obviously all of these amendments reflect maybe what's on the people's mind, or sometimes what's on the legislator's mind, whether statute or amendment. There were both of those. Okay, I will start with the first question. If you could rewrite one element of how Americans learn about government, what would you change to make state constitutions more visible and relevant? I will obnoxiously start with this one, since it is what we do at State Court Report. Like I said, our nonpartisan site has every case you could want in recent years, so we try to have the documents and track the trends. But I would say to educators, I think it would change year to year, because you should talk about what your students are interested in right then and use the most modern application that you can find, like Julia's website. Unlike the U.S. Supreme Court, most state Supreme Court arguments are on camera, and they're archived as well. The states don't always make it totally easy for you to find, but Harper's team at the ACLU and their partners have an argument coming up later in March, and that will be on camera. So I think finding the most modern way to teach it is what I would say. Julia?
I would echo that. I mean, when my kids were young, I would have them listen to Supreme Court arguments that were on issues about
Are you that
kids.
mom, Julia?
I am.
Oh my God.
And they would love it.
I heard they loved it.
And we would talk about it. But there's so many. I think taking kids into court. I've sat with a lot of our plaintiffs while a case is being argued and have them whisper to me, "Can I really come in here and watch court whenever I want?" And I think young people don't understand that the courts are their courts, and you can walk in and witness. And so, I totally agree. Engaging in courts and watching what happens there is so important, whether you do it on video or in person.
Can I just say, I wish, if I could change one thing, I would say make civics more robust in school again.
Right. Just
Because
more of
so-
it in general.
Yeah, there's been this sweep to take parts of civics out, to not allow it at all. You have to learn it on your own, and that should not be what it is. I mean, we had Schoolhouse Rock and Fraggle Rock. I'm aging myself a little bit, but we had those things as a supplement to school. It wasn't the replacement. And so I think that making sure, we saw like things in Iowa where they tried to take civics out completely, and we were fighting that in Iowa, but to have civics and have it robust and a fulsome curriculum at the elementary, middle, and high school, I think is so, so critical to equip people to know that stuff early and not have to learn it on your own or once you get to a certain age.
I would love for educators to be able to connect why we have government to what they talk about. Like I think about, schools who have like student body president elections, like that's another opportunity to explain, like we all have to live in society together. We don't want to have to duke it out every time we have a dispute. So like, why do we have government? Like, why do we have courts? And it's because we've decided that when there are disputes, this is how we're going to solve it. We're going to solve it with facts. We're going to solve it with fair, neutral decision makers. And I think connecting those basic principles of like, how are we all going to live together in a society where maybe we all come from different places and don't agree on everything. I think there's so many opportunities to do that at every level with educators. So I'd love for that basic connection of like why we have government and why we have courts.
Yeah. I'm trying, these questions are good. I got distracted because I have too many good questions to go with. Let's do this one. For issues like climate change or LGBTQIA protections, are state courts becoming the new front line of rights protections in the U.S.? I think that builds a little on what you were just saying. You hope that things don't have to end up in court, but that's often what we're hearing about lately.
Yeah, and I do think, I think it's cyclical, right? I think about the fight for marriage equality, where there was a cycle where it started in federal court and then it went back to state court,
right.
And then it came to federal court again. And so I think we're seeing that on queer and trans rights too. We're seeing this moment where people are seeking those additional protections in their state constitutions, fundamentally because they want to live in their state, right? They want to be where they are. They don't want to have to move to a different state to feel like they can be safe as trans people or as trans young people in their families. And so I do think we are now in that moment, which is also a good opportunity for folks to realize that, look, the federal constitution is the floor, right? State constitutions can do more. And so I do think, and then that's cyclical. I think once enough states start making their states places where trans people can feel safe and welcome, maybe we'll be back in federal court again, but I do think that's where we are in this cycle.
Okay. And Julia, yeah, same question for you. And also, obviously, you have some states that have the green amendments that are working to protect the climate, and then in some states there's less of a protection for the climate, for lack of a better way to describe it. What are you seeing as far as the courts being the venue?
Yeah. So I founded our Children's Trust in 2010, and in the last 15, 16 years, we've been very intentionally working both at the state level and at the federal level, because in our federalist system, it's a conversation. In state courts, it's a conversation. In federal courts, I think we need to be in both places on these issues in terms of protecting young people's rights to life, to liberty, which include climate rights. And so we will keep working both in state courts and federal courts. And I do agree with what Harper said, that like what happens in states are the laboratories of democracy. I mean, that's how they were set up. And it can then inform what changes at the federal level as well. So really important to be in both places.
Okay. All right, this will probably be our last question, unfortunately. Can you talk about the relationship between court-driven reform and legislative reform? Is rights-driven litigation enough? That is a big question. Anyone want to jump in?
I think it's a part of it, but I don't think it's enough. For the league, we do education, we do mobilization, we do voter protection, which is part of the litigation work that we do, but we organize. And so I think that making sure that we are having conversations, organizing people, because before it becomes a law, there's an opportunity to stop or slow it down before that. And so oftentimes what that means for us is, if it's in federal, if it's in Congress, we are flooding a committee room, making legislators aware, not on our watch. We're watching, you're gonna have an issue, don't come to our cities and do town halls because you're gonna be in trouble, right? But I think before that, having conversations with legislators, but also just making them aware that you are watching, because so much stuff goes in Congress, moves in Congress, and people don't know it's happened. And I think the same thing happens at the state legislature as well. Things move and you don't know that it's moved. And so taking that opportunity to organize, get people involved, raise visibility about the issues happening in the state will help us do litigation as a last resort, hopefully.
Either of you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, and I mean, we keep democracy by using it, whether we're in our city councils or before county commissioners or state legislatures, right, or in Congress, and we're in the courts and we're in the streets. Like, we need to be everywhere to really protect the rights that we hope our young people will end up holding.
Harper?
No, I think both recently the ACLU helped lead an activation day at Congress where we had transgender people, young people and their families in Congress talking to the representatives. That happens in state courthouses too. And to me, I think that's the thing that can have the greatest impact is young line. They start to sort of embrace the humanity of trans and queer people, and that can make change long term.
Right, thank you. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming today. I appreciate so much our panel. We can have a 20-second lightning round. Anything that you want to leave with today that you haven't been able to say yet?
I would love it if we could just show the prior 3 slides real quick. Just resources for educators. If you go back one more. 2 great books on one of our cases, Juliana versus United States. And then the next slide is a documentary that's streaming on Netflix, Youth v. Gov, really great resource. And then lastly, next slide, we have a climate rights corps for youth to get involved and be in touch with us. So I wanted to share that with educators.
And I'll just mention that the League, in response to the constitutional crisis we declared last year, launched a Unite and Rise 8.5 million voter initiative. And so we are trying to get 8.5 million of the people who set out in 2020 or 2024 to engage. And every 90 days, we have a playbook where you can do small democracy actions in your community, whether that's with your city council, whether that is with your state legislator, whether that's with the federal government. So I would just invite people to plug in and find ways to do that. But also, when we vote this time, bring 5 people.
Absolutely. All right, thank you so much. I think also Harper didn't get to do that plug, but the ACLU also has a ton of resources, the Brennan Center and State Core Report. We also have a lot of information on all of these issues that will hopefully be helpful to you and your students. So thank you so much for coming today. Thank you to the panel. On a personal note, I have a book signing at 10:15 for my young readers book called Thank You for Voting. Sadly, Harper and Julia are not featured because the topic is voting, but if you want to learn more about how Celina came to do this work, that's my plug for that. Buy the book so you can learn about Celina. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.